What if the key to your entire future was hidden in the past, tucked away in a place you could never have imagined? What if a life of struggle and sacrifice was built upon a secret, a lie that, if uncovered, could change everything? For one waitress, scrubbing counters and counting pennies to keep her family afloat, a single act of kindness was about to unlock a story of stolen love, devastating betrayal, and a legacy she never knew was hers. This is a story about a faded photograph, a billionaire's long-held grief, and a test of character so profound it could either shatter a young woman's spirit or reveal the unbreakable strength she never knew she possessed. The air in the Greasy Spoon diner was thick with the holy trinity of aromas: stale coffee, sizzling bacon, and the faint, sweet scent of despair. Lena Washington knew them all intimately. They clung to her uniform, her hair, and her very soul after every 12-hour shift. For 5 years, this had been her world. A world of chipped ceramic mugs, sticky tabletops, and the relentless, rhythmic clang of the kitchen bell. It was a world that paid just enough to keep the lights on in the tiny apartment she shared with her grandmother and just enough to cover the copays for the medications that kept the old woman's fragile heart beating. Lena moved with an economy of motion born from exhaustion. She refilled a trucker's coffee without being asked, slid a plate of eggs in front of a regular before he could open his menu, and offered a weary smile to a new face in a corner booth. This one was different. He'd been coming in for weeks, always sitting at the same secluded table, always ordering the same thing: black coffee and a piece of toast, dry. He never read the paper, never looked at his phone. He just sat, staring out the window at the rain-slicked Chicago street, his shoulders slumped inside a cashmere coat that was worth more than Lena made in a month. There was a profound sadness about him, a stillness that felt heavier than the city's gray sky. Her co-workers called him the ghost he paid in cash, always a crisp $100 bill for a $5 tab, and always told her to keep the change with a quiet, gravelly voice before disappearing back into the city's anonymous bustle. Lena used the extravagant tips to buy her grandmother's expensive prescriptions, a small, recurring miracle that staved off the worst of her financial anxiety. Tonight, the diner was winding down. The rain had intensified, drumming a frantic rhythm against the large plate-glass windows. The ghost sat at his usual table, his coffee untouched and growing cold. Lena, wiping down the counter, watched him in the reflection of the chrome napkin dispenser. He looked older tonight, more fragile. As he finally rose to leave, his movements were stiff. He fumbled with his coat, and in the process, his hand caught the edge of his wallet, sending it tumbling from his inner pocket. It hit the linoleum floor with a soft, leathery thud. "Sir, you dropped this," Lena called out, rounding the counter. He turned, a flicker of alarm in his pale blue eyes. He hadn't noticed. Lena bent down to retrieve it. It was heavy, made of rich, dark leather, worn smooth with time. As she picked it up, it fell open. A small, laminated photograph, yellowed at the edges, slipped from a worn sleeve and fluttered to the floor, landing face up. Time stopped. The clatter from the kitchen faded. The drumming of the rain ceased. Lena's breath caught in her throat, a sharp, painful hitch. She stared at the picture, her heart beginning to pound a frantic, disbelieving rhythm against her ribs. Couldn't be. It was impossible. But there was no mistaking that face. The wide, joyful smile, the bright, intelligent eyes that crinkled at the corners, the way a single curl of dark hair fell across her forehead. It was her mother. It was Eleanor Washington, captured in a moment of pure happiness, a moment from a life Lena had only ever seen in the one other photograph she possessed, the one on her grandmother's nightstand. A mother she'd lost to a sudden illness when she was only 3, a mother who was little more than a collection of her grandmother's whispered stories and a lingering scent of lavender in a hope chest. Lena's hand trembled as she reached for the picture. Her fingers brushed against the cool, smooth surface. It was real. This ghost of a man, this silent, wealthy stranger, carried a photograph of her dead mother in his wallet. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with 1,000 unspoken questions. The man's face, usually a mask of detached melancholy, had crumbled into a landscape of raw shock. He stared from the photograph in her hand to her face, then back again. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him ashen. Where did you get this?" Lena's voice was a whisper, barely audible over the sudden roaring in her ears. The man didn't answer. He simply stared at her, his own breath seeming to have deserted him. In her face, he could see the ghost of the woman in the photograph, the same high cheekbones, the same gentle curve of her jaw, the same deep, soulful eyes. It was like seeing a memory walk out of the past and stand before him, breathing and real. "Her name," the man finally managed, his voice cracking with an emotion Lena couldn't place. "What is her name?" "Eleanor," Lena said, her voice shaking but clear. Her name was Eleanor Washington. The man flinched as if struck. A wave of pain, so intense and so profound, washed over his features. He stumbled back a step, one hand reaching out to steady himself against the back of the booth. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were glistening with unshed tears. The carefully constructed walls of the reclusive billionaire Arthur Sterling had just been breached by a 26-year-old waitress in a greasy spoon diner. The past had just reached out and grabbed him by the throat, and for the first time in decades, he didn't know what to do. The silence stretched between them, thick with the impossible reality of the moment. He had carried that picture for 30 years, a sacred relic of a buried life. And now, the living embodiment of that life was standing before him, asking a question he had never thought he would have to answer. Arthur Sterling felt the world tilt on its axis. For 30 years, that photograph had been his private penance, a folded-up piece of his soul he kept close to his heart. It was a reminder of a different man he once was, a man who had loved with a fierce, all-consuming passion, and a man who had lost everything. He had looked at Eleanor's face every single day, tracing the lines of her smile, remembering the sound of her laughter, a ghost he willingly carried. He had never expected to see that ghost's eyes looking back at him. "Eleanor," he repeated, the name an exhalation of grief and wonder. He sank back into the booth, his legs suddenly weak. He looked at Lena, truly looked at her, and the resemblance was staggering. It was in the stubborn set of her jaw, the warmth in her brown eyes, the innate grace in her posture, even in a stained waitress uniform. It was Eleanor, reborn. Lena stood frozen, the photograph still clutched in her hand. Her mind raced, trying to connect two completely disparate points in her universe. The sad, rich man from the corner booth and the mother she barely knew. How? Why? The questions swirled, a chaotic storm in her head. "Please," Arthur said, his voice regaining a sliver of its usual command, though it was frayed at the edges. "Sit down." Hesitantly, Lena slid into the opposite side of the booth. The vinyl was cracked and cold. She placed the photograph and the wallet on the table between them, as if they were artifacts in a museum. She felt a protective urge over the picture, a sudden, fierce connection to this tangible piece of her mother. "I don't understand," Lena began, her voice low. "How do you know my mother?" Arthur took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to gather the scattered fragments of his composure. He was Arthur Sterling, a titan of industry, a man who moved markets with a single word. But in this moment he was just a man, stripped bare by a ghost from his past. I knew her. A very long time ago," he said, his gaze fixed on the photograph. "She was important to me." The understatement hung in the air, heavy and insufficient. Lena could feel there was more, a universe of unspoken history behind those simple words. Her mind flashed to her grandmother, whose stories of Eleanor were always tinged with a deep, unyielding sadness, a sorrow that went beyond a mother mourning a lost child. There were gaps in the narrative, vague references to a difficult time before Lena was born, a period of heartbreak her grandmother refused to elaborate on. "My grandmother never mentioned you," Lena stated, a hint of suspicion creeping into her tone. Her life had taught her to be wary. Kindness from strangers, especially rich ones, usually came with strings attached. "I wouldn't expect her to," Arthur said quietly. He finally looked up from the photo and met Lena's eyes. The pain in his was so raw, so genuine, that it disarmed her. Our acquaintance, it did not end well. He needed to think. He needed to get out of this diner, away from the prying eyes of the remaining staff who were now openly staring. He needed to be in a place where he could control the environment, where the world wasn't spinning so violently. "I cannot have this conversation here," he said, his tone shifting, becoming more resolute. "But I must. We must." He paused, his mind working quickly. "Your name is Lena Washington." She nodded, her throat tight. "Lena, I know this is unorthodox. It's shocking. But I need you to come to my office tomorrow morning. I will answer your questions. All of them. I promise." Lena's instincts screamed at her. Go to a strange man's office? A billionaire? It sounded like the beginning of a horror story. But then she looked down at the photograph of her mother's smiling face. The truth, whatever it was tied to this man. For her mother's memory, for the missing pieces of her own life, she had to know. "I have a shift tomorrow," she said, the practicalities of her life crashing back in. "I can't just. I will compensate you for your lost time," he interjected quickly, pulling the wallet towards him. "Whatever you would make in a week, a month, it doesn't matter. Just name it." The offer felt crass, a clumsy attempt to use money to solve a problem that was deeply personal. Lena bristled. "This isn't about money." "I know," Arthur said, his expression softening with regret. "Forgive me. It's a force of habit. Poor one. This is not a transaction, Lena. It's a request. A plea. There are things you have a right to know. Things I have a right to understand." His sincerity was palpable. This wasn't a powerful man making a demand. It was a broken man asking for a chance to explain a 30-year-old wound. Lena thought of her grandmother, of the mounting medical bills, of the constant, gnawing worry. The practical part of her knew that a month's wages could mean a new treatment, could mean a small measure of peace. But the deeper part of her, the part that yearned to understand where she came from, knew that this was about so much more. This was about the empty space in her history that her mother's absence had left behind. "Where is your office?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Relief washed over Arthur's face. "Sterling Tower, downtown. My assistant will be waiting for you at the front desk at 10 a.m. Just give her your name." He scribbled the address on a napkin with a pen that looked like it was worth more than her car. "Her name is Maria. She'll take care of everything." He stood up, his movements more steady now, a sense of purpose having settled over him. He looked down at Lena one last time, his gaze lingering on her face, a mixture of awe and sorrow in his eyes. "Thank you, Lena," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea. You have no idea what this means." He turned and walked out of the diner, leaving the napkin and a $100 bill on the table. The small bell above the door chimed, announcing his departure into the rainy night. Lena was left alone in the booth, the silence of the nearly empty diner pressing in on her. She picked up the napkin with the address, her fingers trembling. Sterling Tower. The name was synonymous with Chicago's corporate elite. It was a world away from the greasy spoon. She looked down at her hands, half expecting to see them changed. Everything felt different. The air was charged with possibility and dread. She had gone into her shift a tired waitress, worried about bills and the future. Now she was a woman holding a key to a past she never knew existed, a past that lived in the wallet of a billionaire. Tomorrow, she would walk into the lion's den, not for money, but for the truth. For Eleanor. The next morning, Lena stood before Sterling Tower, a shard of glass and steel that pierced the gray Chicago sky. It was a monument to power, wealth, and a world so far removed from her own that it felt like a foreign country. People in tailored suits and expensive shoes streamed past her, their faces set with purpose, their BlackBerries and iPhones glued to their hands. Lena smoothed down the front of her best dress, a simple navy blue A-line she'd bought at a thrift store for a cousin's wedding. It had felt elegant in her tiny apartment, but here, under the shadow of so much corporate might, she felt painfully out of place, like a sparrow that had wandered into an eagle's eyrie. Taking a deep breath to steady her hammering heart, she pushed through the revolving glass doors. The lobby was a cavern of polished marble and cold, recessed lighting. A waterfall cascaded down a granite wall, its gentle roar a stark contrast to the hushed, reverent silence of the space. It was less a lobby and more a cathedral dedicated to commerce. At the center stood a massive, circular reception desk, manned by a woman with impossibly perfect hair and a headset that seemed surgically attached. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked, her tone polite but dismissive, her eyes scanning Lena's simple attire with a flicker of practiced judgment. "I'm here to see Mr. Sterling," Lena said, her voice sounding small in the vast space. "My name is Lena Washington." The receptionist's expression shifted instantly. The professional indifference evaporated, replaced by a focused, almost deferential attention. She typed Lena's name into her computer, and a new face appeared beside her. "Ms. Washington? I'm Maria, Mr. Sterling's executive assistant." The woman was in her 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a warm, genuine smile that immediately put Lena at ease. "He's expecting you. Please, come with me." Maria led her past the security turnstiles and into a private elevator. There were no buttons inside, only a discreet keycard slot into which Maria inserted a card. The elevator began its ascent, silent and swift. The pressure change made Lena's ears pop. "Mr. Sterling is on the penthouse floor," Maria explained. "He rarely takes meetings this early." "This must be very important." She gave Lena a curious but kind look. Lena could only nod, her throat too dry for words. Important didn't even begin to cover it. This felt momentous, life-altering. The elevator doors opened directly into a reception area that was larger than Lena's entire apartment. A single, sweeping window offered a breathtaking, panoramic view of the city and the vast, gray expanse of Lake Michigan. The furniture was minimalist and modern, the art on the walls abstract and expensive. Arthur Sterling was standing by the window, his back to her, looking out at the city he ruled. He turned as she entered, and in the bright morning light, he looked different from the man in the diner. The shadows of grief were still in his eyes, but they were joined by a new emotion, a nervous, palpable anticipation. He had traded his cashmere coat for a perfectly tailored suit, the uniform of his world. "Lena, thank you for coming," he said, his voice steady. He gestured to a pair of plush leather armchairs. "Please sit." Maria quietly excused herself, closing the heavy office door behind her and leaving the two of them alone in the silent, opulent space. The only sound was the faint hum of the building's climate control. Lena sat on the edge of the chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Arthur sat opposite her, not behind his massive mahogany desk, but in the other armchair, creating a sense of intimacy that was at odds with the intimidating surroundings. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Arthur seemed to be searching for the right words, a task that was clearly unfamiliar to him. "I imagine you have many questions," he began at last. "Just one to start," Lena said, her voice gaining strength. "How did you have a picture of my mother?" Arthur's gaze dropped to his hands. "Your mother, Eleanor, and I were very close once. A lifetime ago. We met when we were barely out of our teens. I was a student at the University of Chicago, and she was working at a bookstore near campus. She was the most brilliant, vibrant person I had ever met. She could talk about poetry, politics, philosophy. She challenged everything I thought I knew about the world." He spoke of her with a reverence that made Lena's heart ache. He was painting a picture of a woman she had never known, a young intellectual full of fire and life. "We fell in love," he said simply, the words landing with incredible weight. "Deeply. We were inseparable for 2 years. We made plans. We were going to run away together, move to the West Coast, away from my family and the future they had mapped out for me." "Your family?" Lena prompted, sensing they were a crucial part of the story. A shadow passed over Arthur's face. "My father was a difficult man. He built this company from nothing. He was ruthless, controlling, and he had very specific expectations for my life. That life did not include a brilliant, beautiful, and headstrong black woman from the South Side. The unspoken word hung in the air between them. Racism. It was an old, ugly story, but hearing it in this context, tied to her own mother, made it feel sharp and personal. "He found out about us," Arthur continued, his voice laced with a 30-year-old bitterness. "He forbade me from seeing her. He threatened me, threatened to disinherit me. I was young, and foolishly I thought I could defy him. I told Eleanor we had to be patient, that I would find a way for us. But my father, he didn't play by the rules." He paused, the memory clearly painful. "He went to see her behind my back. I don't know everything he said to her. I can only imagine. He offered her money, a substantial amount, to disappear from my life. He told me later, with a triumphant smile, that she had taken it without a second thought. He told me she was just after the sterling fortune, that her love for me was a lie." Lena felt a cold fury rise within her. "My mother would never do that." "I know that now," Arthur said, his eyes filled with regret. "But I was 21. My father was a master manipulator, and he had planted seeds of doubt. He showed me a bank transfer slip. He had a letter, supposedly from her, saying she was leaving and that it was for the best. I tried to find her, to talk to her, but she was gone. Her family had moved. The bookstore owner said she'd quit without notice. It was as if she had vanished from the face of the earth. I was heartbroken, and I believed him. I let my father's poison convince me that the purest thing in my life had been a lie." He leaned forward, his expression earnest, pleading for her to understand. "That photograph. She gave it to me a week before she disappeared. It's all I have left of her. I've carried it every day since, a reminder of what I lost, of the man I failed to be." Lena listened, her mind reeling. This wasn't just a story about a lost acquaintance. It was an epic tragedy of stolen love. She could feel the weight of his regret, a burden he had carried for 3 decades. She thought of her grandmother's sorrow, and suddenly it made a new, more painful kind of sense. Her grandmother hadn't just lost a daughter. She had watched her daughter's heart be broken by a world that wouldn't accept her love. Before Lena could process the flood of emotions, the office door opened without a knock. A man in his late 30s, dressed in a suit even sharper and more modern than Arthur's, strode in. He had the same pale blue eyes as Arthur, but where Arthur's were filled with melancholy, this man's were cold and assessing. He carried an iPad and a condescending smirk. "Uncle Arthur, we have the preliminary figures from the Asian market, and I think you'll be—" He trailed off, his eyes landing on Lena. He scanned her from head to toe, his smirk tightening into a sneer of undisguised contempt. He didn't see a person. He saw a problem. "Julian," Arthur said, his voice suddenly hard as steel. "I am in a private meeting. What did I tell you about walking in here unannounced?" "My apologies," Julian said, his tone anything but apologetic. He looked from Arthur to Lena and back again. "I didn't realize you were entertaining. Should I have security see your guest out?" The insinuation was clear and ugly. He was talking about Lena as if she were a piece of trash to be disposed of, a gold digger who had somehow slipped past the building's defenses. The warmth and intimacy of the conversation with Arthur vanished, replaced by a chilling hostility. "This is Lena Washington," Arthur said, his voice dangerously low. "She is my guest, and you will treat her with respect." Julian raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Washington." He let the name hang in the air for a moment. He then turned his gaze fully on Lena, a cruel, calculating light in his eyes. "Well, Lena Washington, I'm Julian Sterling, Arthur's nephew and the CEO of this company. I handle my uncle's more delicate affairs. So whatever it is you think you're here for, perhaps you should be talking to me instead." The battle lines had just been drawn. Lena wasn't just facing a ghost from the past anymore. She was facing a living, breathing antagonist, a man who represented all the prejudice and power that had torn her mother's life apart 30 years ago. and he was looking at her as if she were something to be crushed. Julian Sterling moved with the predatory grace of a man who had never been told no in his life. He walked around the armchairs, positioning himself behind Arthur, a subtle but clear power move that placed him in a position of oversight. He looked down at Lena, his expression a mask of feigned concern that was far more insulting than open hostility. "Uncle, you have to be careful," Julian said, his voice smooth as silk but laced with venom. He was speaking to Arthur, but his words were daggers aimed directly at Lena. "There are people in this world who look for opportunities. They see a man of your stature, your generosity, and they see a target. They concoct stories, manufacture connections." "That is enough, Julian," Arthur snapped, his face flushing with anger. He started to rise, but Julian placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture that was both restraining and patronizing. "I'm only thinking of you, of the family, of the company's reputation," Julian continued, his eyes never leaving Lena's. "Ms. Washington, I'm sure you have a very compelling story. People in your position often do. But Sterling Enterprises has a robust legal department that deals with these sorts of claims every day. Frivolous, opportunistic claims." Lena's fear and awe of the opulent office evaporated, replaced by a hot, righteous anger. He didn't know her. He didn't know a single thing about her life of relentless hard work, about the love she had for her grandmother, about the integrity that was the only real thing she owned. He saw her simple dress, her skin color, and her presence in his uncle's office and immediately cast her as a villain, a grifter. "I haven't made any claims," Lena said, her voice quiet but firm, cutting through his condescending monologue. She stood up, meeting his cold gaze without flinching. "I came here because your uncle asked me to. He had a photograph of my mother. I wanted to know why. That's all." "Your mother?" Julian scoffed, a disbelieving laugh escaping his lips. "Oh, this is better than I thought. A long-lost connection? How wonderfully cliché. Let me guess, he knew her from a charity event? Or perhaps she was a former employee with a grievance." "She was the love of my life," Arthur said, his voice a low growl. He finally shook off Julian's hand and rose to his full height, standing beside Lena. For the first time, they looked like a united front. "She was a woman your grandfather, my father, drove away with lies and threats because he was a hateful bigot. A trait, I see, that he managed to pass down through the generations." The insult hit its mark. A flicker of raw fury crossed Julian's face before he masked it with his customary smirk. "My grandfather was a shrewd businessman who protected his legacy. He built this empire. An empire you seem willing to risk on the word of a waitress." He said the word waitress, as if it were a disease. "Get out, Julian," Arthur commanded. "Gladly," Julian said, turning to leave. He paused at the door, turning back to Lena. "A word of advice, Ms. Washington. This little fantasy you're spinning won't end well for you. My uncle is an old man, sentimental and prone to flights of fancy. But I am not. I protect this family. And I will find out exactly who you are and what you really want. And when I do, I will expose you." He shot a final, disdainful look at her and then left, the heavy door clicking shut behind him, leaving a toxic silence in his wake. Lena was trembling, a mixture of rage and humiliation coursing through her. She felt exposed, judged, and utterly powerless. Julian had, in the span of 5 minutes, made her feel like a criminal. Arthur saw the look on her face, and his own expression was a storm of anger and regret. "I am so sorry, Lena. He is my brother's son. He has his grandfather's ambition, but none of his vision. Only his cruelty. He thinks I'm here for your money," Lena said, her voice thick with emotion. "He sees everyone through the lens of his own greed," Arthur replied bitterly. "Please, don't let him. He doesn't matter." But he did matter. Julian was a real and present threat. He was the modern embodiment of the forces that had destroyed her mother's happiness. And he had just declared war on her. Arthur seemed to realize this as well. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by a sense of urgency. Julian's intrusion had changed the dynamic. This was no longer a quiet exploration of the past. It was a high-stakes confrontation with the present. "He won't stop," Arthur murmured, more to himself than to her. "He'll dig into your life, try to find anything he can use to discredit you." He looked at Lena, a new resolve hardening his features. "He won't find anything because you are telling the truth. But we need more than just my memory and your word. We need proof. Something undeniable." He walked over to a section of the polished mahogany wall and pressed a discreet panel. A section of the wall slid open, revealing a private study, a sanctuary filled with old books, leather-bound volumes, and artifacts from his travels. It was the heart of the man, hidden behind the facade of the billionaire. "Come with me," he said, his voice low and conspiratorial. "My father thought he had erased every trace of her, but he didn't know about the box." He led her into the study. The air smelled of old paper and leather. He went to a large, antique safe built into the wall, spun a combination dial with practiced familiarity, and swung the heavy door open. From the dark interior, he withdrew a simple wooden box about the size of a shoebox. It was plain, unadorned, and clearly very old. He placed it on a large, leather-topped desk. His hands hesitated for a moment before he lifted the lid. Lena leaned forward, her breath catching in her throat. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a collection of treasures. A dried flower, a ticket stub from a movie, a small silver locket. And underneath it all, a thick stack of letters, tied together with a faded blue ribbon. "She wrote to me almost every day," Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion as he gently lifted the bundle of envelopes. "And I wrote to her. We couldn't always see each other, so we lived in these letters. This is all I have left of her voice." He untied the ribbon, his fingers trembling slightly. He picked up the top letter and handed it to Lena. The envelope was addressed in a strong, elegant cursive to Mr. Sterling. The paper was thin and delicate with age. Lena's hands shook as she unfolded the letter. The ink was slightly faded, but the handwriting was clear. It was a fluid, graceful script, full of personality. And as she began to read, the voice of her mother, Eleanor Washington, spoke to her for the first time in her life. "My dearest day, the bookstore was so quiet today after you left. The whole world seems quiet without you in it. I found myself rereading the Frost poem we talked about, the one about the road less traveled. I feel like that's us. We're standing at a fork in the path, and every safe, easy road leads us away from each other. But I'm not afraid. Taking the hard road with you is better than any easy path I could ever walk alone." Lena's eyes filled with tears, blurring the words on the page. She could feel the love, the hope, the fierce intelligence of the woman who had written them. This was no gold digger. This was a woman deeply, profoundly in love, a woman willing to defy the world for the man she cherished. She looked up at Arthur, who was watching her, his own eyes glistening. "She was real," Lena whispered, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. "She was so real." He nodded, handing her another letter, this one from his own hand, the handwriting bolder, more angular. "My Eleanor, my father lectured me for an hour tonight about duty, legacy, and the Sterling name. It all sounds like so much noise to me. The only name that matters is yours. The only legacy I care about is the one we build together. Forget California. Let's go to Paris. Let's go anywhere. Just say the word, and I'll leave all of this behind. I'll meet you at our spot by the lagoon tomorrow at dusk. Don't be late. Every minute without you is a minute wasted." They were a testament to a love that was vibrant, passionate, and doomed. Lena read on, letter after letter, piecing together the story of their secret romance. They wrote of clandestine meetings in Hyde Park, of shared dreams of a future filled with books and art and children, of their growing fear of Arthur's father, a looming, oppressive shadow over their happiness. Then, the tone of the letters began to shift. A new note of anxiety crept in. Eleanor wrote, "I think someone is following me. A man in a gray car. I've seen him outside the store, near my apartment. I'm probably being paranoid, but it feels like your father's eyes are everywhere. And then the last letter from Eleanor. The paper was slightly crumpled, as if it had been held in a clenched fist. My love, something terrible has happened. Your father came to see me today. He said things I can't bear to write down. He told me you had agreed to end things, that you were engaged to a woman he had chosen. He said you sent him to give me money to take care of the problem. I screamed at him. I told him he was lying, that you would never do that. But he was so convincing, Arthur. He had details about the woman, about your future. He made my love for you feel cheap and foolish. My heart is broken. I don't know what to believe. I have to get away. My mother is arranging for us to leave the city. I don't know where we're going. If any of this is a lie, if you still love me, you have to find me. Please find me. But he never had. He had received his father's forged letter the next day and believed the lie. The two lovers had been deliberately and cruelly pushed apart, each believing the other had betrayed them. Lena looked up from the letter, her heart shattered for the two young people whose future had been stolen from them. This box wasn't just a collection of memories. It was evidence. It was the truth. It was the weapon they needed to fight a man like Julian. But as she looked at the date on the last letter, a cold dread began to form in the pit of her stomach. The date was from late October. Lena's birthday was in July of the following year. A quick calculation sent a shockwave through her. Mr. Sterling. Arthur, she said, her voice trembling. This last letter, when my mother wrote this, she was already pregnant. With me. The full weight of the revelation descended upon the quiet study. Arthur stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief as the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place in his mind. 30 years of lies, 30 years of carefully constructed history, all fell away in an instant. Eleanor hadn't just been his lost love. He hadn't just lost a future with her. He had lost a child. He had a daughter who was sitting right in front of him. A daughter who had grown up in poverty while he lived in unimaginable wealth. A daughter he had never known. The truth, in its full, devastating scope, was finally revealed. The revelation settled over Arthur Sterling not like a gentle dawn, but like a lightning strike, cracking open the foundations of his world. He looked at Lena, at her eyes so like her mother's, at the determined set of her jaw that he now recognized as his own, and the last 30 years of his life replayed in his mind as a tragic farce. He had mourned a lost love, but he had been ignorant of a far greater loss. My daughter, he whispered, the words foreign and momentous on his tongue. The sound was swallowed by the thick silence of the study. He reached a hand out, his fingers trembling, but let it fall before he touched her, as if unsure he had the right. Lena was just as stunned, her mind struggling to absorb the impossible truth. This man, this sad stranger from the diner, was her father. The concept was too vast, too world-altering to grasp. All her life, she had been the daughter of a ghost, a story her grandmother told. Now, that story had a beginning she'd never imagined. The anger she felt toward the faceless forces that had torn her parents apart was now directed at a specific man, her grandfather. A man who had not only destroyed a great love but had also denied a child her father and a father his child, all for the sake of his own prejudiced pride. Tears streamed down Lena's face, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of profound, earth-shattering revelation, of a lifetime of questions being answered at once. She finally understood the deep, abiding sorrow in her grandmother's eyes, the weight of the secret she must have carried all these years, protecting her daughter's memory and her granddaughter's peace. Arthur finally found his voice, a ragged, broken sound. All these years, I thought I was alone. I built this empire as a monument to nothing. It was empty. All this time you were out there. You were alive. I could have known you. I should have fought harder for her. I should have known my father was lying. I should have. You were 21, Lena said softly, finding a well of empathy for the young man in the letters, the boy whose heart had been broken and whose trust had been betrayed. You were a boy and he was your father. He manipulated you both. In that moment, a bond formed between them, forged in the crucible of a shared tragedy. They were two strangers, a father and a daughter, who had just found each other across a chasm of 30 years of lies. The tender, fragile moment was interrupted by the sharp buzz of the intercom on Arthur's desk. Maria's voice, tight with urgency, came through the speaker. "Mr. Sterling, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Julian is on his way back up, and he has 2 men with him from the legal department." The outside world came crashing back in. Julian was not going to let this go. He had tasted a threat to his power, to his inheritance, and he was coming back with reinforcements. "He can't know," Arthur said, his mind snapping back to the present, the old instincts of a corporate titan taking over. "Not yet. We have the truth, but he will try to bury it in litigation and slander. He will paint you as a fraud, and me as a senile old fool." He looked at the box of letters on the desk. "This is our story, Lena. But in a courtroom or a boardroom, it's just that, a story. We need something more." Just as he said it, Lena's phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from her neighbor. "Hey Lena, some guy in a fancy suit is at your building, asking questions about you and your grandma. Seemed like a real jerk. Thought you should know." Julian was already moving. He was investigating her, trying to dig up dirt. He would go to her grandmother, harass a sick old woman to serve his own ends. The thought filled Lena with a cold, protective fury. This was no longer just about the past. This was about protecting her family now. "What do we do?" Lena asked, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. Arthur's eyes hardened. The melancholy man was gone, replaced by a shrewd, determined strategist. "We fight him on our own terms. He wants to play dirty? Fine. We will arm ourselves with the undeniable truth." He looked at Lena. "Your grandmother. Does she know about me?" I don't know," Lena admitted. "She never spoke of you. She only ever said my mother died of a broken heart long before the pneumonia took her." "Then we need to talk to her," Arthur said. "She is the only other person alive who knows what really happened that winter. Her testimony could corroborate these letters." He paused, his expression turning grim. "But Julian will try to get to her first. He will try to intimidate her, or worse, bribe her." A plan began to form in Arthur's mind. "Maria," he said into the intercom, "when my nephew arrives, tell him I've gone for the day, that I was feeling unwell and left. Do not, under any circumstances, let him know Lena is still here." "Of course, Mr. Sterling," Maria's voice replied, unflappable. Arthur turned to Lena. "There's a private exit that leads to the garage. We'll take my personal car. No driver. No one can know where we are going." He quickly gathered the letters, placing them back in the wooden box with a reverence that was almost holy. He held the box like it was the most precious thing in the world. For him, it was 30 years of his life, the proof of his love, and the key to the daughter he had just found. The confrontation with Julian had escalated things, but it had also clarified them. The fight was here and it was now. Julian had made a grave error. He thought he was dealing with a senile old man and a naive young woman. He had no idea he was about to face the combined wrath of a father protecting the daughter he had just discovered. Julian, meanwhile, was already putting his own vile plan into motion. He had dispatched a private investigator to Lena's neighborhood, a man skilled in digging up financial records, interviewing disgruntled neighbors, and finding any crack in a person's life to exploit. Separately, Julian had made a call to a man he kept on his personal payroll, a corporate fixer named Marcus Thorne, a man whose morality was as flexible as the situation required. "I need you to run a background check," Julian had instructed Thorne over the phone, his voice cold and precise. "Lena Washington works at the Greasy Spoon Diner on Archer Avenue. I want everything: credit score, past addresses, any juvenile offenses, parking tickets. I want to know what she had for breakfast. I suspect she's a pro, part of a ring that targets wealthy widowers. Find her accomplices." Julian was creating a narrative, a fiction he could sell to the board and, if necessary, the press. The story of a conniving young woman preying on a lonely, grieving billionaire was much more palatable than the messy truth. His next target was Lena's grandmother. He intended to approach her himself. He would be the picture of concern, the dutiful nephew worried for his uncle's well-being. He would offer her money, a charitable gift to help with her medical expenses, in exchange for her signature on a document stating that Lena was emotionally unstable and prone to flights of fancy. He would twist a granddaughter's love and concern into a story of elder abuse. He was playing chess, and Lena was, in his mind, merely a pawn to be sacrificed. What he didn't count on was that the pawn had just been promoted to a queen, with a king standing right behind her. Julian's plan to ambush Lena's grandmother was thwarted by Arthur's quick thinking. While Julian's investigator was still asking questions around the neighborhood, Arthur and Lena were already in his discreet town car, a dark sedan with tinted windows, speeding towards the south side. The wooden box of letters sat on the seat between them, a silent passenger holding the weight of their shared past. The drive was tense. Lena gave directions to her small, walk-up apartment building, a world away from the gleaming steel and glass of Sterling Tower. As they drove, Arthur kept glancing at her, a look of wonder and profound regret on his face. "You look so much like her," he said quietly. "But you have a strength, a resolve in your eyes. That's new. Life has made you strong." "It's made me tired," Lena confessed, the adrenaline of the morning beginning to wear off, leaving a deep-seated exhaustion in its place. "I've spent my whole life just trying to keep my head above water, taking care of my grandmother. It's all that's mattered." "About your grandmother," Arthur said, his tone serious. "We don't know what my father told her and your mother. We don't know what she believes. She might see me as the man who abandoned her daughter." "She'll see the truth," Lena said with a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "My grandmother is the strongest person I know, and she loved my mother more than anything. She'll want to know what really happened." When they arrived, Lena led Arthur up the 3 flights of creaking stairs to her apartment. The building was old, the air thick with the smells of cooking from a dozen different homes. It was a place of struggle, but also of community, a concept alien to the sterile hallways of Arthur's world. Lena unlocked the door and they stepped inside. The apartment was small and sparsely furnished, but it was impeccably clean and filled with a sense of warmth. Crocheted afghans were draped over the worn sofa, and photos of Lena at various ages lined the mantelpiece. An elderly woman with kind, tired eyes and beautiful silver hair sat in a comfortable armchair by the window, a book in her lap. She looked up as they entered, her face breaking into a loving smile when she saw Lena. "Lena, baby, you're home early," she said, her voice soft and melodic. Then her eyes fell on the tall, well-dressed man standing behind her granddaughter, and her smile faltered. Her expression shifted, her eyes widening in disbelief and then hardening with an old, deep-seated pain. She recognized him instantly. Even after 30 years, she recognized the boy who had broken her daughter's heart. "Martha," Arthur said, his voice barely a whisper. "What is he doing here?" Martha Washington asked, her voice trembling with a sudden, fierce anger. She struggled to her feet, using the arm of the chair for support. "Get him out of here, Lena. You have no idea what this man did to your mother." "Grandma, please," Lena said, rushing to her side. "It's not what you think. He didn't abandon her. They were both lied to." "Lies," Martha scoffed, her eyes blazing with the protective fire of a mother. "I was there, child. I was there when my Eleanor came home, her heart in pieces, clutching a bank check from his father. I was there when she cried herself to sleep every night for a month. I held her while she wasted away from a broken heart. Don't you talk to me about lies." Arthur stepped forward, his face a mask of anguish. "Martha, please. I never sent that money. I never would have. My father, he orchestrated everything. He told me she left me, that she took the money and wanted nothing more to do with me. I believed him. It's the greatest regret of my life." To prove his point, He opened the wooden box and took out the bundle of letters. He held them out to her. "This is the truth. This is our truth. Eleanor's and mine." Martha stared at the letters, her angry facade beginning to crumble. She recognized her daughter's elegant script on the top envelope. Hesitantly, she took them. Her hands shook as she read the first few lines of one of Eleanor's love-filled letters, then one of Arthur's, filled with promises of a shared future. The years of bitterness and grief began to melt away, replaced by the dawning, horrific understanding that her daughter's tragedy was even greater than she had known. They hadn't just been star-crossed lovers. They had been victims of a cruel, calculated deception. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked from the letters to Arthur, and then to Lena. "She loved you so much," Martha whispered, her voice breaking. "She never stopped loving you." She sank back into her chair, the letters clutched to her chest. "And she never told you about the baby. She was trying to protect her. She was afraid your father would try to take her away." The three of them stood in the small living room, the full, heartbreaking truth finally laid bare, connecting them all in a web of shared grief and stolen time. It was in that moment, as the raw emotion of the past hung heavy in the air, that Lena was faced with a test of her own character, a trial engineered by the cynical hand of Julian Sterling. Her phone rang, a shrill, jarring sound that broke the sacred silence. It was an unknown number. Hesitantly, she answered. "Is this Lena Washington?" A smooth, professional voice asked. "Yes. Who is this?" "My name is Marcus Thorne. I represent a party who has a vested interest in the well-being of Mr. Arthur Sterling. I've been authorized to make you a significant offer to resolve any misunderstandings you might have." Lena's blood ran cold. It was Julian's fixer. She glanced at Arthur, who was watching her intently. She put the phone on speaker. "I'm not sure what you mean," Lena said, her voice steady. "Let's not play games, Ms. Washington." Thorne's voice continued, oozing with condescension. "We know about your financial situation. We know about your grandmother's mounting medical debt. Life is hard. We understand. So we'd like to make it easier. We are prepared to wire $5 million to an account of your choosing. In addition, we will cover all of your grandmother's medical expenses for the rest of her life. The best care, the best doctors. All of it taken care of." The number hung in the air. $5 million. It was an astronomical, life-shattering sum. It was freedom. It was the end of worry, the end of scrimping and saving and working 12-hour shifts. It was the best medical care in the world for the woman she loved most. It was everything she had ever dreamed of. "What's the catch?" Lena asked, her heart pounding. "No catch," Thorne said smoothly. "Just a simple agreement. You sign a non-disclosure document, agreeing to never contact Mr. Sterling again. You will state that you were mistaken about any personal connection. You walk away and you never look back. You will be set for life. Everyone gets what they want." Martha and Arthur listened, their faces grim. This was the ultimate temptation, a devil's bargain designed to prey on her desperation. Julian was betting that her poverty was stronger than her integrity. Lena thought about the offer. She pictured a life without debt, without the constant fear of a medical bill wiping out her savings. She pictured her grandmother in a beautiful private hospital room, with round-the-clock care. It was a powerful, seductive image. She could take the money, and who would blame her? She owed these people nothing. Arthur Sterling had lived a life of luxury, while she and her mother and grandmother had struggled. Wasn't she entitled to this? But then she looked at the letters in her grandmother's lap. She looked at the face of the man who was her father, a man who had been grieving for 30 years over a lie. She thought of her mother, Eleanor, whose love story had been erased, whose memory had been tarnished. Taking the money would mean validating their lies. It would mean agreeing that her mother's love could be bought and sold. It would mean putting a price on the truth on her own identity. It would mean that Julian and the hateful man his grandfather had been would win. They would have successfully used their money and power to erase Eleanor Washington all over again. Lena took a deep breath. She had been poor her whole life. She knew how to survive. She had her dignity, her love for her family, and her integrity. And those things were not for sale. "Tell your boss," Lena said, her voice ringing with a clarity and strength that made both Arthur and Martha look at her with awe, "that my family's history is not a commodity to be bought and sold. My mother's love was not a business transaction, and my identity is not for sale. You can take your $5 million and your disgusting offer, and you can tell Julian Sterling that he is going to fail. We are not going away." She ended the call, her hand trembling but her heart resolute. She had been weighed and measured, and she had not been found wanting. She had faced the ultimate test of her character and had chosen truth over wealth, dignity over comfort. In that moment, she was no longer just a waitress. She was Eleanor Washington's daughter, and she was Arthur Sterling's heir. And the fight had just truly begun. Arthur Sterling looked at Lena with an expression of profound pride and awe. The strength she had just displayed, the unshakable integrity in the face of such a life-altering temptation, was more valuable than his entire fortune. It was the spirit of Eleanor, refined and hardened by a life of adversity. He knew with absolute certainty that this was his daughter. The DNA test he had already covertly arranged for would only confirm what his heart now knew to be true. "He underestimated you," Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion. "They all did. They don't know her," Martha added, her voice fierce with a grandmother's love. She had witnessed Lena's struggle for years, had seen her sacrifice her youth, her dreams, her own happiness to care for her. "They see a poor girl. They don't see the queen she is." The rejection of the bribe was a declaration of war. Julian would not take it lying down. He would escalate. His next move would be to try and seize control of the company, to paint Arthur as mentally incompetent, a senile old man being manipulated by a clever charlatan. He would use his position as CEO to convene an emergency board meeting and attempt a coup. "He'll try to have me removed," Arthur said, his mind already 5 steps ahead. "He'll use my age, my reclusive nature, and now this sudden obsession with you as proof that I'm no longer fit to lead. He'll call a vote of no confidence." "Can he do that?" Lena asked, alarmed. "He can try," Arthur said, a grim smile touching his lips. "But the board members are loyal to the Sterling name, and more importantly, to the Sterling fortune. Julian represents stability. I, at the moment, represent a scandal. We have to discredit him before he can discredit us." "How?" "By revealing the truth," Arthur stated. "Not just our truth, but his. Julian isn't just protecting the family legacy. He's hiding a crime. My father's actions, the fraud, the conspiracy, were not just immoral. They were illegal. And I have a strong suspicion that Julian knows more about it than he's letting on." Arthur's mind went back through the years. After his father's death, Julian, then a young and ambitious executive, had been the one to oversee the organization of his grandfather's personal files. It was a task Arthur had been too grief-stricken and disillusioned to undertake himself. "My father kept meticulous records of everything," Arthur mused. "He was arrogant. He would have documented his dealings with your mother's family, considering it a business expense. It's possible, even likely, that Julian found those records years ago. He has known the truth all along and has been actively suppressing it to protect his own inheritance." It was a sickening thought, that Julian had known about Lena's existence and had done nothing, allowing his own cousin to live in poverty while he enjoyed the fruits of a legacy that should have been shared. It wasn't just greed. It was a profound act of cruelty. "We need to find those files," Lena said, her resolve hardening. "They would be in the old family archives, in the sub-basement of Sterling Tower," Arthur said. "Access is highly restricted. Julian keeps the only key." A plan began to form, audacious and risky. It would require them to break into their own company's archives. It would need perfect timing and a loyal ally. "Maria," Arthur said, pulling out his phone. "She's been with me for 40 years. She started as my father's secretary. She knows every secret that building holds. And she despises Julian." He made the call. He explained the situation to Maria in clipped, urgent tones. He told her about Lena, about the letters, about his father's deception, and about Julian's likely cover-up. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then Maria's voice came through, firm and clear. "What do you need me to do, Arthur?" The plan was set for that night. Julian was hosting a major corporate charity gala, an event that would keep him and most of the senior staff occupied and out of the tower until late. Maria would disable the security cameras on the sub-basement level for a 10-minute window and use her master access card to get them into the archives. It was a small window of opportunity, and everything depended on it. As night fell, Arthur and Lena returned to the city. Lena had changed into a simple black trouser suit that Maria had arranged to be delivered, helping her blend into the corporate environment. They entered Sterling Tower not through the grand lobby, but through the same discreet garage entrance they had used to leave. Maria met them at the private elevator, her face calm but her eyes bright with nervous energy. "Julian and his team left for the gala 20 minutes ago," she reported. "The night security shift has just started. I've scheduled a system diagnostic for the archive-level cameras that will begin in 5 minutes and last for exactly 10. You have to be in and out in that time." The three of them descended to the sub-basement, a place of cold concrete and humming machinery. Maria swiped her card, and a heavy steel door hissed open, revealing a vast, climate-controlled room lined with endless rows of gray filing cabinets and archival boxes. The air was cold and smelled of old paper and dust. It was a mausoleum of corporate history. "My father's personal files are in the back, section Gamma," Arthur directed, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "They're arranged by year." They moved quickly, their footsteps silent on the smooth concrete floor. They found the section labeled with the year Eleanor had disappeared. Box after box was filled with old financial ledgers, contracts, and correspondence. "Look for anything related to personal disbursements or private household accounts," Arthur instructed. He would have hidden it in plain sight. They worked frantically, pulling down heavy boxes, their fingers dusty from years of neglect. The minutes ticked by. 7 minutes left. 6. Lena's heart pounded in her chest. It felt like they were searching for a single needle in a mountain of hay. Then Arthur let out a sharp intake of breath. "Here." He pulled out a thick, leather-bound ledger. Tucked inside the back cover was a separate manila folder, unmarked. He opened it. Inside was a collection of documents. A copy of the bank transfer to Martha Washington's sister, through whom the money had been funneled. A signed, notarized statement from the bookstore owner, claiming Eleanor had confessed to him that she was conning Arthur. And most damning of all, a typed, internal memo from Arthur's father to his personal lawyer. It read, "Regarding the E.W. matter, the situation has been neutralized. A payment of $50,000 has been rendered and accepted. The subject has vacated the city. I have also procured a letter of termination which has been shown to my son, who has accepted the situation. Consider the file closed." It was the smoking gun. Cold, clinical proof of the conspiracy. But as Arthur flipped to the next page, he found something even more shocking. It was a second memo, dated 10 years later, just after his father's death. It was from Julian to the same law firm. "In reviewing my grandfather's personal effects, I have come across the file pertaining to the E.W. matter from 30 years ago. I understand the delicate nature of this information. Please ensure that all original documentation is moved to deep storage and that this file is permanently sealed. The family's official position is that this matter never occurred. My uncle, Arthur Sterling, is not to be made aware of this file's existence under any circumstances. His emotional stability regarding this past event remains a concern." Lena read it over his shoulder, and a wave of nausea washed over her. "He knew," she whispered in horror. "He's known for years. He knew you were lied to. He knew about my mother. He buried it." The truth was more monstrous than they had imagined. Julian's cruelty wasn't born of a sudden threat. It was a long-held, calculated secret he had been keeping for his own gain. Their time was up. An alarm would sound any second. Arthur quickly used his phone to photograph every single document in the file. Just as he took the last picture, Maria's voice came through a small walkie-talkie she had given them. "Time's up. Get out now." They shoved the file back, slid the box into place, and raced for the door, their hearts pounding with the thrill of their discovery and the horror of what they had found. They made it out just as the steel door hissed shut and the red light of the security camera flickered back to life. They had the proof, they had the truth, and they had the weapon they needed to destroy Julian Sterling. The confrontation was no longer a matter of if, but when, and it would not be behind closed doors. Arthur Sterling decided it would be in the one place Julian felt most powerful. The company boardroom, in front of the very people whose respect he so desperately craved. The stage for the final confrontation was set. Arthur, using his authority as chairman of the board, called an emergency meeting for the following morning. The stated purpose on the agenda was bland and corporate. A discussion on the future leadership and strategic direction of Sterling Enterprises. Every board member, every senior executive, and most importantly Julian, would be there. Julian arrived at the boardroom feeling confident, even triumphant. He believed his uncle's sudden meeting was a desperate, flailing move. He had spent the night preparing his own presentation, complete with a psychological assessment from a hired expert questioning Arthur's mental fitness, and the preliminary, slanderous report from his private investigator on Lena. He was ready to paint a picture of a beloved founder in his dotage, being manipulated by a cunning predator. He walked into the room ready for a coup. He was about to walk into an execution. The boardroom was on the 49th floor, one below Arthur's penthouse office. It was a grand, intimidating room with a 30-foot-long mahogany table and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The 12 board members, a collection of powerful, serious-faced men and women, were already seated. Julian took his place at the head of the table, the seat reserved for the CEO. Arthur sat at the opposite end, the traditional seat of the chairman. Between them was a vast expanse of polished wood. Lena was not in the room. Arthur had insisted she wait in his office. This was a fight he needed to have for her, a public reclaiming of his family's honor. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Arthur began, his voice calm and measured, betraying none of the emotional turmoil of the past 48 hours. "I have called this meeting because a matter of grave importance has come to my attention, a matter that strikes at the very heart of this company's integrity and my family's legacy." Julian smirked, leaning back in his chair. This was playing out exactly as he'd expected. "Uncle, if this is about your new-found acquaintance," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, "perhaps we should discuss it privately. I'm not sure this is the appropriate venue to air personal grievances." "On the contrary, Julian," Arthur said, his eyes locking onto his nephew's. "This is precisely the venue, because this is not about a personal grievance. It's about a 30-year-long fraud that was perpetrated by the founder of this company and a subsequent cover-up perpetrated by its current CEO." The room fell silent. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Julian's smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of genuine alarm. "That is a serious and baseless accusation," Julian said, his voice tight. "Is it?" Arthur asked. He pressed a button on the console in front of him. A large screen descended from the ceiling. The first image that appeared was the beautiful, smiling face of Eleanor Washington. "This is Eleanor Washington," Arthur announced to the room. 30 years ago, she was going to be my wife." He then displayed the photographs of the letters, one after another, the words of love and hope flashing on the screen for all to see. He told the story, his voice steady and powerful, of their love, of his father's interference, of the lies that tore them apart. Julian began to protest. "This is ancient history, a sentimental fantasy. It has no bearing on this company. It has every bearing." Arthur cut him off, his voice like a whip crack. He then displayed the picture of the memo from his father to his lawyer, detailing the neutralization of the E.W. matter. Gasps rippled through the room. It was cold, hard proof of a conspiracy. "My father used this company's resources, its legal power, to illegally and fraudulently destroy a woman's life and to deceive his own son," Arthur declared. He tarnished the sterling name with his bigotry and cruelty. He paused, letting the weight of the revelation sink in. Then he turned his full attention to Julian. A terrible story, but one that might have remained buried in the past. Except it didn't. The final image flashed onto the screen. The memo from Julian himself, instructing the lawyers to bury the file and keep the truth from his uncle. The evidence of the cover-up. It was undeniable. Julian's signature was clearly visible at the bottom. Julian's face went white. He looked like he had been physically struck. He was trapped, exposed, his decades of deceit laid bare for his colleagues to see. "You knew," Arthur said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He rose from his chair and walked slowly down the length of the table until he was standing directly behind his nephew. "You knew my father lied. You knew Eleanor was innocent. You knew I had spent 30 years of my life mourning a lie. You found this file after my father died. And what did you do? Did you come to me with the truth? Did you help me heal that wound? No, you buried it. You buried it to protect your own ambition, your own inheritance. You left a branch of your own family, your own blood, to struggle in poverty, just so you wouldn't have to share your power." He looked around at the stunned faces of the board members. "And when the truth finally, miraculously, came to light, what did you do? You tried to bury it again. You sent your investigators to harass my daughter. You sent your fixer to try and bribe her with $5 million to make her go away." The mention of Lena being his daughter, and the attempted bribe, sent a fresh shockwave through the room. The narrative was complete. Julian wasn't just an ambitious executive. He was a monster. Julian, cornered and desperate, finally snapped. His sophisticated facade crumbled, revealing the ugly, arrogant man beneath. "She's a nobody," he spat, rising from his chair to confront Arthur. "A waitress from the slums. She has no right to any of this. I built this company with you. I have given my entire life to it, while you were hiding in your penthouse, mourning your little ghetto romance. That money, that power, it's mine by right." The confession, born of arrogance and rage, sealed his fate. He had admitted to his motive, admitted to his contempt, admitted to everything. He had convicted himself with his own words. Arthur didn't even flinch. He simply looked at the board. "I am asking for an immediate vote. The removal of Julian Sterling as CEO and as a member of this board, effective immediately, for gross misconduct, conspiracy to commit fraud, and actions detrimental to the reputation of this company." One by one, the hands went up. It was unanimous. Julian Sterling stared around the room, his face a mask of disbelief. His world had crumbled to dust in the space of 15 minutes. He was ruined. He looked at Arthur, his eyes filled with a venomous hatred. "You will regret this," he hissed. "No, Julian," Arthur said, his voice quiet but filled with the weight of absolute victory. "You will." Security guards entered the room to escort the disgraced CEO from the building. The reign of Julian Sterling was over. The truth had not just come out. It had triumphed. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Julian Sterling was not only stripped of his title and board seat but was also completely disinherited. Arthur, with the full backing of the board, initiated legal proceedings against him for the misuse of corporate funds in his cover-up and his attempts to intimidate and bribe Lena. The Sterling family, and the company it ran, was cleansed of the poison that had festered within it for a generation. Arthur's first act as the reinstated leader of his company was to make a public announcement. He didn't hide the scandal. He met it head-on. He told the story of his love for Eleanor Washington and the devastating injustice that had been done to her. And then, with a pride that resonated in every word, he introduced the world to his daughter and his sole heir, Lena Washington. The news became a sensation, a modern-day fairy tale of a lost heiress found. But for Lena, it wasn't about the fame or the fortune. It was about justice. Justice for her mother. Her first priority was her grandmother. With Arthur's resources, Martha was moved to the finest medical facility in the country. The best doctors, the best treatments, the constant care. All the things Lena had dreamed of providing were now a reality. Lena was by her side every day, watching as the color returned to her cheeks and the light of peace returned to her eyes, finally unburdened by the secrets and sorrows of the past. Lena's new reality was disorienting. She moved out of the small apartment and into a beautiful suite in the same building as Arthur. She traded her waitress uniform for business attire as she began to learn the empire that was now her legacy. Arthur became not just her father, but her mentor. He saw in her the same sharp intelligence and compassion that he had loved in her mother. He taught her about business, about philanthropy, about how to wield the immense power she now possessed for good. Together, they established the Eleanor Washington Foundation, a charitable organization dedicated to providing educational grants and opportunities for young women from underprivileged backgrounds, the kind of woman Eleanor herself had been. It was a way to honor her memory, to turn the pain of the past into a promise for the future. Lena poured her heart into the foundation, finding a purpose that was more fulfilling than any amount of money. She was no longer just surviving. She was building something that would last. Her relationship with Arthur blossomed. They spent hours talking, trying to fill the 30-year gap that had been stolen from them. He told her stories about her mother, her laugh, her favorite books, her terrible singing voice. Lena, in turn, told him about her life, the struggles and the small joys. They were a father and a daughter, finding their way back to each other, healing the wounds of the past with the simple, powerful balm of family. One crisp autumn afternoon, months after their world had been turned upside down, Lena and Arthur stood in a quiet, beautiful cemetery. They were in front of a new headstone, one carved from rose-colored granite. It read, Eleanor Washington, beloved mother, cherished soul. Her love is a legacy. Lena placed a bouquet of lavender, her mother's favorite, at the base of the stone. For the first time, visiting this place didn't feel like an act of mourning a ghost, but of honoring a life. The truth had set her mother free. It had set them all free. She would be so proud of you, Arthur said, his arm around his daughter's shoulders. Lena leaned her head against him, a quiet sense of peace settling over her. I think she's proud of both of us, she replied. The story of Lena Washington is a testament to the enduring power of truth. It reminds us that integrity is a treasure more valuable than any inheritance, and that love can echo through generations, a silent strength that can overcome even the most profound injustices. Our past does not have to define our future, and the secrets buried in the dark can, and often will, find their way into the light. For in every quiet act of kindness, in every refusal to compromise our morals, lies the potential for a miracle. How many other truths are out there, waiting for just one person to be brave enough to ask the right question? If this story of love, loss, and ultimate vindication touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more inspirational stories that celebrate the strength of the human spirit. Your support helps us continue to share tales that remind us of the good in the world.